Welcome to the online classroom for the module FIN2601. This is going to be part 6 of the classes on this module. And like I said in the previous class, I'm just going to take you through a number of different examples with regards to to share evaluation, right? Just different ways share evaluation can be asked and the different ways you can approach it. Okay, so what I'm going to do as I take you through this, I'm going to be looking at different questions from one of the past assignments. I'll just take some questions from the 2022 assignment 2, semester 1 assignment, 2022 semester 1 assignment 2. So I'm going to be looking at questions to do with share evaluation, just explaining how you would approach those questions, what the questions are all about. The questions you'll get will not always be straightforward with regards to share evaluation, like the questions we saw in the previous class. Like if you remember, in the previous class when we finished off by looking at some examples, how to solve to get the price of a share or different values, just looking at some standard types of examples, right? So what I want to do now, I want to now show you other different types of examples you might get, just like what you should be thinking about when you're looking at share valuations and what the questions might, what types of questions you might actually get. So I'm going to be using the 2022 assignment 2 semester 1 as an example. So the first question I'm going to look at from that assignment is question 13. So these are unique types of questions, not your traditional types of share valuation questions, right? But the concepts are still the same. So Prepare Technologies, so I'll start with question 13. Prepare Technologies has just paid a 2 Rand 10 cent annual dividend. Okay, so the key thing to look at here, we've been told just paid. So this happened in the past. So this is D0. The company has a policy of increasing dividends by 5% annually, right? And you would like to purchase 100 shares of stock in the firm, but you realize that you will not have funds to do so for another 3 years. If you require a 15% rate of return, how much will you be willing to pay per share for the 100 shares when you can afford to make this investment? Okay. So you see, this is like a unique kind of example. It's not the traditional type of example. Drawing a timeline always helps, right? We are currently at time 0, 1 year is going to pass, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and so forth, right? So we are told that you are at time 0, but you're only going to get money to purchase shares at time 3, right? So you're not going to have funds for another 3 years. So this is when you're going to have money to actually purchase the shares. So you're being asked to determine the price of the share at time 3. How much will you be willing to pay per share at time 3? How much will you be willing to pay for 100 shares at time 3? So in other words, we want to determine the price of the share at time 3. And to determine the price of the share at time 3, right, we need to take the dividend at time 4 divided by our required return minus the growth rate. Remember, our formula says if we want the price at time 0, we take the dividend at time 1 divided by R minus G, right? So the same will apply if we're at time 3. If we're at time 3, and we want the price of the share, we take our dividend at time 4 divided by the required return minus the growth. And an important thing to note, this formula is just the same as saying D3 multiplied by 1 plus G over R minus G. Okay, so that's the idea. That's how we get the price that we're looking for at time 3. So what we're going to do, we are just going to use this formula right here. We're going to use this formula. So we do have our required return. R is 15%. We do have our growth rate. Our growth rate is 5%. But we don't have the dividend at time 4. We've been given the dividend at time 0, and we want to determine the dividend at time 4. So to determine the dividend at time 4, we can take the dividend at time 0 multiplied by 1 plus growth to the power 4. So this will give us the dividend at time 4, right? So we can then calculate our dividend at time 4. Okay, we're looking at question 13. I have the solutions right here. We can then calculate our dividend at time 4 by simply saying 2.10 multiplied by 1 plus g to the power 4, and then we get 2.5526. So remember, you have to be comfortable with the power button on your calculator. It's a really, really important button. I'll just see if I can put a calculator up on the screen. So it's important to note that different calculators have the power button on different places. Like it won't all be the same for all calculators. So it just depends the calculator that you are actually working with. Okay. So on our calculator, we would say 2.10 plus 1.05 to the power 4. Okay, let me just put the calculator up here. Yeah, I hope you can see the calculator. Of course, we always have to make sure that we've cleared our calculator, right? So for us, we would say 2.10 multiplied by open bracket 1 plus 0.05 close bracket to the power 4, and then we get 2.552563. Okay, 2.55. So that's how we get the answer. So be comfortable with your power function on your calculator, right? So that will give us D4, and then once we have D4, we can then now easily calculate the price at time 3. We simply take the dividend at time 4 divided by our required return minus growth, and then we get 25.53. So you see, this is one type of example or one type of question you might get that's not the traditional type of question, right? And then another one is this question number 14. Is also a different type of question that you might get that you need to be familiar with, right? So this question says Blue Early Productions pays no dividend at the present time. So that means that currently there is no dividend. The company plans to start paying an annual dividend in the amount of 40 Rand a share for 2 years. So they plan to start paying an annual amount of 40 Rand a share for 2 years, commencing 4 years from today. So it's always important to draw a timeline so that we can depict all this information that we are being told, just to make sense of it. A timeline always helps. After that time, the company plans on paying a constant dividend of 75 cents a share, annual dividend indefinitely. How much will you be willing to buy a share of the stock today if your required return is 11.6%? Okay, so at time 0, we are here. Time 1, no dividend is going to be paid. D1 is equals to 0. but they'll start paying an annual dividend of 40 cents a share for 2 years, and that's going to happen 4 years from today. So second year, nothing. Third year, nothing. And then 4 years from today, the company is going to pay a dividend of 40 cents for 2 years. And then after that, the company plans on paying a constant 75 cents dividend a share indefinitely. So how much will you be willing to pay for this share today? Okay, so that's the question. So you see, this is exactly like that question, that we looked at before, whereby you simply follow the following steps. Just see if I can open those steps that we have, whereby you simply just calculate your dividends for each future year, and then you determine the price of the share in the year just before constant growth. So first, determine the expected future dividends. Remember, variable growth model, or when you have a number of different dividend payments going into the future. So the first part of the question has already been done for us, right? We've already determined that D4 is 0.4, D5 is 0.4, D6 is 0.75. And remember, when we drew the timeline before, we said D1 is 0, D2 is 0, D3 is 0, D4 is 0.4, D5 is 0.4, and we said D6 is 0.75. Okay, so we already have our dividends. We've already determined all the dividends, right? So that's the first part. And then the second part is determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividends. Determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividends, right? So for us, we have D1 being equal to 0, D2 being equal to 0, D3 being equal to 0, D4 being 0.4, D5 0.4, and D6 0.75. So this is the last dividend, right? And then the price in the year before the last dividend, like the price at time 5, right, is just going to be equal to the dividend at time 6, right, divided by the required return. Remember here, our dividend is going to remain the same as 0.75. So our growth rate is 0. So we have a constant dividend from year 6 going forward. Our growth rate is 0. And when our growth rate is 0, it means we just take this dividend of 0.75 and we divide it by the required return to get the price of the share in the year just before the last dividend, right? Because our growth rate is 0, we don't have growth, minus G, and G is 0. So we just take our dividend divided by the required return. So that's the second step. We determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividend, and then we get 6.4655, right? And then after that, we determine the present value of the share. We determine the present value of the share, of the price of the share in the year before the last dividend. And then we also determine the present value of the future dividends, right? And we can also just combine parts 3 and 4, right? We can just combine parts 3 and 4. We can just then determine the present value of all the future dividends and the price. So there are 2 approaches to do that. They'll give you the same answer. The approach that I described on the notes would be, first of all, you determine the present value of the dividends only, right? Which is 0, CF0, 0, CF1, 0, CF2, 0, CF3, 0.4 CF4, and 0.4 CF5, and then you discount these at 11.6 interest rate, and then you can, okay, you discount these at 11.6 interest rate, YR, and then you can get the present value of these dividends, right? And then after doing that, you can then get the present value of the price, whereby we take 6.4655 to be a future value. We take N, it's a price at time 5, so we take N to be 5. We take our discount rate to be 11.60, and then we get the present value. And then the answer we get here, we add it with the answer we get here, and then we get the price of the share today. Okay, let me just quickly do those calculations. Right, if we now, okay, so I've calculated the values, right? So we can now then add this present value, right, of 3.73498 plus the present value of the dividend. So we can take the present value of the price plus the present value of the dividends. And if you add those two, you'll just get 4.22, right? Which is just the same, as if you had just discounted everything together, which is just 0 is CF0, that corresponds, okay, CF0 is always 0, right? CF0 is always 0. And then CF1 is 0, that corresponds to D0, CF2 is 0, that corresponds to D2, CF3 is 0, that corresponds to D3, CF4 is 0.4, that corresponds to D4. And then D5 plus P5 corresponds to C5. Then we use an 11.6% discount rate, and we get 4.22. Okay, so that's another type of example on a question you are likely to encounter as you do share valuation. Okay. Next, the next type of question I want to look at is question number 15. Question number 15. So question number 15 again is that similar type of question where it's not really clear cut. You have to draw a timeline. You have to think about what they're saying, what has happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future, and then you try to find the answer. So this one is pretty similar to the question that we just did, right? We're told that we have a company that's preparing to pay its first dividend, and then it's going to pay the following dividends over the next 3 years, respectively. The company has stated that after that, its annual dividend will be 1.45% per share indefinitely. What is the stock's worth per share if you require 13.5% of return on stocks of this type? So this question now should be a bit easier given the question that I just did. It's pretty similar. May you please put the video on pause and just try to see if you can answer this. And then after attempting it, you can continue the video, and then I'll take you through how to do this calculation. Okay, so just give it a go. Put the recording on pause, try this question, and then we can continue. It's really similar to the question that I just did for number 14. Okay, so I hope you were able to do that question. It's actually quite a really simple question if you think about it. It's all about drawing your timeline. And then once you draw your timeline, everything becomes a bit more straightforward, right? It just becomes easier to understand what is going on, right? The company is preparing to pay its first dividend. So after 1 year, it's going to pay 0.75. After 2 years, 0.80. After 3 years, 1.35. And then after that, time before, the company will pay 1.45 indefinitely, meaning into the foreseeable future or in perpetuity. So the first step, determine all your future dividends. Second step, determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividend. So we use this formula because we assume that the dividends are not growing. So is the no growth module, which just say D4 over R. We determine that price P3, and then after that, we discount our cash flows, where D1 is going to be the first cash flow, D2, the second cash flow, D3, the third cash flow, plus, so it's D3 plus P3. So you can do this 3 ways, right? 2 ways, sorry, 13.5% is the discount rate, then we calculate the NPV. So remember, you can do this 2 ways. You can either determine the PV of the dividends by themselves, right? And then the PV of the share price by itself, and then you can add them, like what I did in the previous example I showed you. Or you can just do it all at once, like what I've written out here. Okay, so if you follow that approach and you do everything carefully, this is what you should get. We said we're on question 15. The solution here, of course, I've got a lot of steps, but basically I just, this is D1, this is D2, and then this is D3 plus P3, sorry, plus P3, and then I discounted and I got my price. So remember, this is P3, right? P3. And the whole idea is that we had D1, we had D2, we had D3, and we had D4. We were given these dividends, and then we used the last dividend to get P3, and then we discounted. And remember, the first cash flow is always 0. We don't use D0 when we're actually discounting to get the price. Okay. Then the next type of question is question number 16. Question number 16. Question number 16 says, Lift Funding announced today that it will begin paying annual dividends next year. The first dividend will be 0.22 a share. The following dividends will be 0.25, 0.3, 0.6, and 0.7 for the following years. After that, dividends are projected to increase at 7.5% per year. How much would you be willing to pay today to buy 1 share of the stock if you desire a return of 11.5%? Again, this is a similar type of example. The only key difference here is that the final dividend is going to be growing at 7.5% rather than being a no growth dividend, right? But the approach is still the same. Determine all your future dividends, right? Determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividend. Remember, this time we'll be factoring in growth, and then discount all the future dividends and the price of the share and the price in the year before the last dividend to get your price of the share today. So also, again, please put the recording on pause, spend a few minutes, draw a timeline, try to do calculations on this. And then once you've attempted, you know, you should be active in your learning and you should try these things. Once you remember them better, once you've attempted, you can put the recording on play, and then we can compare to see what you have and what I have as I take you through the solution. Right. I hope you were able to do that question. The solution is on the screen. So obviously the first step here is for us to determine all the future dividends, D1, 0.22, D2, 0.25, D3, 0.3, D4, 0.6. And then we determine the price of the share in the year before the last dividend. Remember, now we're dealing with the constant growth. So we say D5 multiplied by 1 plus G over R minus G. To get the dividend at times 6, we have to multiply by 1 plus G. And then we get our price there at time 5. And then we need to discount all the future dividend payments as well as the price. So I prefer to do it together. You can do it individually, discounting the price by itself and the future dividends, right? But I prefer to do it at once, and then we get our price of 12.33. So question 16 is a really simple question. I mean, you just have to be careful. What's really important here, just remember that if we have D5, we have to multiply D5 by 1 plus G to give us D6, and then we divide by R minus G. and then we discount. So the answer is 12.64. So here we actually take the closest answer. We take the closest answer. If we actually calculate, we get 12.33, but the closest answer there is 12.64. Okay. The next question is question 17. Question 17 is relatively straightforward, and we looked at this in the previous classes. It's when we use the free cash flow approach to determining the value of operations or the value of equity. Liquidity Escapade has never paid a dividend, and it is unknown when the company might begin to pay a dividend. Its free cash flow is 135,000 Rand and is expected to grow at 6.5%. And then we can use the weighted average cost of capital to determine the value of operations for the company. And we simply use this formula that we talked about before. We simply take the current free cash flow to the firm, multiplied by 1 plus growth rate over the WACC minus the growth rate. And then this we have, it's 135. The growth we have, 6.5. The WACC we have, 12.5. And then we substitute in and we get our answer there. So that one is a bit simple, straightforward. The calculation is here on the screen, right? It's not really that complicated, right? Next, let's look at question 18. Okay, so the next question we want to look at, okay, we've just looked at question 17. Let's look at question 18. Ecovani is a retail company that recently paid a dividend of 2 Rand. The shares are in equilibrium. The company has a constant growth rate of 5% and a beta of 1.5%. The company's required return on the market is 15% and the risk-free rate is 7%. The company is considering a change in policy, which should increase its beta coefficient to 1.75. If market conditions remain unchanged, what is the new constant growth rate that will cause the price of the ordinary share of the company to remain unchanged? So you see now these are the types of examples that combine a lot of information is combined in this example. So this is when you really need to think about things as to how you're going to approach the question and so forth. So what you need to do here is you first need to determine the current price of the share, right? And you also need to determine the required return. You need to determine the required return, the current required return, and then let's follow it this way. 1, determine the required return, right? Using this beta risk-free rate and the market return, determine the required return of the share. And then after that, determine the current price of the share, right? Determine the current price of the share using the dividend that you've been given, the required return that you've calculated, and the growth rate that you have. Then we get the current price of the share, right? And then after getting the current price of the share, then determine the new required return. Determine the new required return based on the new beta coefficient, right? And then after determining that new required return based on the new beta coefficient, the final thing you need to do, you need to substitute that price that we got into this formula. And then you need to solve for the growth rate. So you'll still use our current dividend. You'll use the new required return that we calculated here. So you will now have these 3 values, and then you need to solve for the growth rate. Yeah, so I want you to try that. Put the recording on pause, determine the current required return using the current beta, then determine the current price of the share using the Gordon growth model, constant growth model using the required return you calculated here, the dividend and the growth rate. Determine the current price of the share, then determine the new required return using the beta of 1.75. right? And then substitute that new required return here, the dividend you've been given there, the price, and then solve for G, the growth rate, the new constant growth rate. So put the recording on pause, give that a try, and then when you're done, you can put the recording on play. Okay, so I hope you were able to do that. Let's go to the calculation here to just see if you were able to do that. Okay. So first, calculate your current required rate of return, which has 19%. Substitute that into the constant growth model, get the price of the share, which is 15 Rand. After that, calculate your new required return, which is 21%. Substitute the new required return, the price of 15, and the current dividend of 2 into your formula. Then you need to solve for your growth rate. So you can do your cross multiplication to solve here. 15 times 0.21 minus G, remove the brackets, 15 times 0.21, 15 times G, 15 times 0.21 is 3.15, 15 times G is 15G, 2 plus G, 2 times 1, 2 times G, right? You group like terms, take everything with G to the same side, meaning we take this minus 15 that side to be with 2G, we take this to that side to be with 3.15. You simplify that, you get 1.15 is equals to 17G, divide both sides by 7, divide both sides by 17, 1.15 divided by 17, then we get 6.76% as our growth rate. So these are now the types of examples where you really have to think about everything you've been given and what it means and how it's all related. This is when sometimes it can get a bit tricky. Okay, but that's the whole idea with these questions. Okay. Next, so that was question number 18. Okay. Next, let's look at question number 19, and then we'll also look at question 20. Now, question number 19, question number 19 says, Sage Petrol has paid annual dividends of 0.32, 0.48, and 0.6 a share over the past 3 years, respectively. The company now predicts that it will maintain a constant dividend since its business has leveled off and sales are expected to remain relatively flat. Given the lack of future growth, you will buy the stock only if you can earn at least a 16% rate of return. What is the maximum amount you should be willing to pay for the stock today? Okay, this is also a really straightforward question. We've looked at a number of these, right? First step, determine your future dividends, right? Okay, no, here actually these are past dividends. So this one is actually a bit different. So these are past dividends, okay? So this now changes things a bit. We are at time 0. And we've been given the past dividends, right? Over the past 3 years, the company, okay, minus 2, over the past 3 years, the company has paid dividends of 0.32, 0.48, and 0.6. So 0.32, 0.48, and 0. So this has happened in the past, right? And then we're told that the company is going to maintain this dividend into the future since things have leveled off. So D0 is now 0.6. This is now the dividend they expect to pay into the future. So it's not going to grow. There is no growth. There's not going to be any growth in this particular dividend. These are in the past. This is what they're going to pay now and into the future. And then we're asked to determine what the price of the share is. So this is a very simple example of the no growth model, right? It's a really simple example of the no growth model, whereby you simply want to determine the price of the share today. So we simply take our dividend over the required return, and then there's no growth, and that dividend is just going to be 0.6 for D1, D2, D3. It's not going to change. divided by our required return, and then that gives us 3.75. Okay, which is the last option there. So it's a different type of question, but if you read it carefully, you can follow it, and then you can understand what's being said there, and then you can get your answer. And then finally, question 20. Now, the key thing with question 20 here when you're dealing with share valuations is that we have this formula, right? We have this formula right here, right? There are there are four important formulas you need to know, right? This is the constant growth model, right? This is the constant growth, sorry, this is actually price. This is the constant, this is the constant growth model, right? This is the constant growth model, which tells us the price of a share is equals to the current dividend multiplied by 1 plus G over R minus G, or the price of a share is equals to D1 over R minus G, right? So I want to give you, I think, four important formulas that you need to know for the exam, right? So what can sometimes happen in an exam, the first formula, you might be asked to calculate the required return using the Gordon growth or the constant growth formula. And you need to remember that the required return can be given by this formula. You can take your expected dividend divided by price plus growth rate, and that can give you the required return. Or that's if you've been given the expected dividend. Or your required return can be calculated by taking the current dividend multiplied by 1 plus G over the price plus the growth rate. So these are two really important formulas whereby you might be given the growth rate, the dividend, and you might be given the price, and then you might be asked to calculate your required return. Or you might just be given the expected growth rate, the expected dividend and the price, and then the growth rate, and you might be asked to calculate the required. So these are two important formulas you should know with regards to calculating the return, like what we're going to do in this example, when you've been given dividends and growth rates, right? And then the other important formula you need to know is that sometimes you need to calculate your growth rate. And your growth rate, when you've been given the return and the expected dividend and the price, is given by this formula if we are using the no growth model, right? And then if we are using the constant, if we've been given the current dividend, meaning we've been given D0, the formula becomes R is equals to P times R minus current dividend over the current dividend plus P. Yeah. Let me just see if I got that right. PR, if we do some cross multiplication here, P0 multiplied by R minus G is equals to D0 plus D0G. And then we get PR minus PG. Is that it? Yes. Is equals to D0 plus D0G. And then we can group the like terms. We get PR, okay, PR minus the dividend. We take the dividend to the other side, is equals to DG plus P. I'm just making subject of the formula. Yeah, so this is the formula. So this formula that I've put up here is the formula you can use. So these are four really important formulas you just need to have on the side for the, so this is actually growth rate, our growth rate will be. So these are just four really important formulas that you need to have for the exam, such that if you're asked to determine the required return, where you've been given the expected dividend and the growth rate and the price, or the required return, where you've been given the current dividend, the growth rate and the price, or the growth rate, where you've been given the required return and the expected dividend and the price, or the growth rate, where you've been given the current price, required return, dividend. So these are the formulas you need to remember for the exam. They will help you, especially if you find it difficult to make subject of the formula to solve equations, right? These formulas will help you a lot. So for us, for this particular question, right, let's see what we actually need to know here. We've been told that investors are interested in purchasing ordinary shares in Loyal Pack. The shares are currently priced at 95.50 Rand. The last dividend paid by the company was 7.50 Rand, and dividends are expected to grow at a constant rate of 6.5% per year forever. So that's the constant growth rate. What is the return that investors can expect if they invest in this share? So we want to calculate the return, right? So we've been given the current price, the current dividend, and the current growth rate, and we want to determine R. So it means we need to use this formula right here, right? So we just need to substitute. Remember, if we had been given the expected dividend, we could use this formula, we would have D1. So we can say 7.50 multiplied by the growth over our price plus our growth rate. Right. And then we can simplify this. We can simplify this. Okay, this is question 20. Right, and we get 14.86, which is 14.86%. Okay, so there we have it. So I was just taking you through a number of examples you might expect to get in an assignment or in an exam. There are many different types. These are not the only ones, right? Like many different types of questions can be asked with regards to share valuations and so forth. But some of the information I've been giving you in this short class will just help you to know the different types of questions you might get and the different types of ways to approach them. So, so that's really important. So I hope the class has been helpful and you were able to follow all of that and everything I was taking you through. Okay, so we're now done with the module. I hope all the classes have been really helpful, and you are now ready to start with your revision, right? So I will have some revision material I'll be preparing, and if you want, you can access it on my website, www.nistutorials.co.za, or you can contact me. I'll be going through some past papers, MCQ questions, just explaining how to answer questions in the exam for exam technique. That package will be available soon. There'll be classes and past paper memos. You can access them on the website. Just keep visiting regularly, or you can contact me for more information on that to help you with the module. And there are other courses available on the website if you're going to continue with financial management, or if you're going to do FIN2601 or any of the other finance modules. So I hope all the classes have been helpful. As usual, any questions or queries with regards to anything in this class or anything covered previously, please feel free to let me know. I won't always be able to get back to you promptly, but I'll try to do so as soon as I can. All the best with your studies. Thank you very much.